Well, hello and welcome to the latest instalment of Underwater Answers. We're out on the bank and we're going to be looking at things that are relevant to this time of year, weather conditions, water conditions, etc, etc. And of course, you guys have sent both me and Fox loads and loads of questions, and we're going to be looking at some of those too. Don't forget, if you want us to answer some of your questions, give us a like and enter your questions below here so we can see exactly what you want to know. If we can do, we'll get round to answering them. So what are we going to be looking at today? Well, the primary thing is algae. It's a massive thing with regards to both fisheries and also fishing. It colours the water up, it creates temperature differences, it causes problems with light penetrating through as well. But how does it affect our fishing? That's going to be the first thing that we're going to look at. So, algae, what exactly is it? Well, for a start, it's a living organism. It's actually a plant. It comes in tiny little organisms, and it also comes in stringy filamentous stuff. But it's the stuff that sits in the water that we're more concerned about. Firstly, what causes it and what causes it to proliferate? Well, that is down to two things: water temperature and also the big one, sunlight. It's a plant, it grows. And it's no coincidence that in the summer, water's green up with loads and loads of algae. Towards the back end of the year, of course, they die. And then what happens is that can cause deoxygenation as well, which has an effect on our fish and our fishing. So just let's have a look at this venue. One of the reasons we come here is because normally this is absolutely crystal clear. But for the last week, we've had really, really bright sunshine. It's just starting to rain now. It's going to chuck it down, in fact, so we might have to bolt for cover in a minute. But this lake is normally really, really clear. Go up to it at the moment, you can't see more than a couple of 3 feet in. It colours the water up. It also breathes in air through the course of the night and expels it back out through the course of the day. That has an effect on the fishing, because sometimes where you would normally catch at night, you catch in the day instead. It's no coincidence, when you've got algae in the water and a lot of weed, that first light is a really key time, because it's that time, just like the changing of the tide. The tide comes in, the tide goes out, that ebb is when the fish like to feed. Same with oxygen. At night, because of photosynthesis, plants and algae take oxygen out of the water, and as it gets light, they turn around, they put it back in again. So suddenly, first thing in the morning, there's just a little bit of a rise in oxygen levels, and that can trigger the fish into feeding. Anyway, let's look at the fishing situation. I'd like to know what bait looks like underwater with algae, and also what zigs look like underwater with algae. What's the best one to do? What's the best colour to use? Is there any difference in colours? And what do they look like from a distance? So here's an extract of when I dived in this lake earlier today to give you an idea of what it looks like. So we'll just dip below the surface now, and when you're looking from the outside in, it looks quite good, but just look at that. As soon as you go just below the surface, you can see what's called scatter. Now, scatter's these tiny little particles. My hand there is about a foot, maybe 18 inches in front of the camera, and I can still see it pretty well. There's a reasonable amount of light there, but that scatter does make long-range visibility quite tricky. So, distance, can't see much. Light levels, not too bad. Let's go a little bit deeper now and see what happens as we go further down. So we're starting to drop down, and you see the colour change. There, my hand's just that little bit harder to see, and it's going to more of a yellowy pea green as the light finds it harder to penetrate through. The other thing which is interesting is we were seeing something called stratification, and what that means is that there are columns of algae in the water. So this is fairly early on in the day. It hasn't risen up through the water yet. It's still sitting mid-water, so the surface layers have got less algae in than the mid layer, and as soon as we get to 2 to 3 foot below the surface, this is when it starts to get even darker, and you can see it's got a real pea green colour there. And there was a very thick band of algae from 3-4 foot down. That's a really important point when you're thinking about zig rigging in the surface layers. So what does that mean from a fishing point of view? Well, specifically with regards to colours, it's quite interesting. Have a look at this. This is me now looking at the bottom from about 2 to 3 foot away. You can just about make out a bait there. but still it's not particularly obvious there. I'm trying to touch it. I'm probably 18 inches away now, even closer still. And only just there, a foot away, can we see it fairly clearly. So that bait, despite the fact that it's really, really bright, when you're more than 3 foot away, you quite simply just can't see it. So let's now have a look at yellow, the opposite end of the spectrum. Similar sort of distance, once again there, a couple of foot away you can start to make it out, but 3 foot away, even though it's bright yellow, it couldn't really be seen. And as we get closer to it, it's standing out a little bit more, but a lot of people think we'll chuck out a bright high-vis yellow bait thinking it's going to be high attract. In this sort of algae water, you know what, it isn't, because yellow's very similar to green. It hides itself away, and from anything more than 3 foot away, it's very difficult to see. And finally, everyone's favourite, pink. And if you know me and you know what I write about all the time, I'm always talking about colours and how important they are. But when there's thick algae in the water, you know what, it's a really, really tough call to see which is the best between pink, yellow and that bright red. You can see the pink there as and when we're close to it, but that's about 6 inches away. And the same thing applies to all 3 of these colours. If you're more than 3 foot away, you quite simply can't see it. Anybody that knows me knows that I put a massive amount of weight in colours, and we've seen there that actually in this sort of water, you know what, colour really doesn't make that much difference. The fish need something to attract them into the area. Colours work very well when they can be seen, but it doesn't matter what fish you are. You haven't got X-ray vision, you can't see through solid. So whether that's silty water, dirty water, or in this situation, that algae, that coloured water, it's very hard to see through it, nigh impossible to see through it. So you need something to attract the fish into the area, and that is smell. I think that in times like this, fish change the way that they find their food. Primarily they're looking, they're hunting for it with their eyes, they're seeing it, and they'll find it that way. They also, of course, use their sense of smell and taste, but when the water goes coloured, with algae in it in this case, they use their sense of smell a lot more. So get a smelly bag out there, get a smelly bait out there, get something to attract them into the area, and then those bright baits can pull them in from a couple of 3 feet away. My own personal favourite, I love using mesh bags. They're very quick and easy to use. Get some boilies, crush them up, a few pellets, a little bit of ground bait, liquid, get it all together, get it as smelly as possible. Don't feed them. That's the key. I don't like to put loads of food down, not in your normal solid bag style with big pellets. I want something that's just going to be a carrier for smell. That sends the signal out. 3 different types of liquid, one heavy one that stays on the deck, one light one like an oil that floats up to the surface, and a soluble one that sends that message around. Mix those 3 liquids down, put them in the bag, send that food message around, and the fish will come to you, and that's when they'll see the bait. And this is basically what it looks like on the deck. Nice little bag of smell around the outside there. I use fairly small particles because I don't want to feed those fish. What I'm doing is I'm using that stick mix as a carrier to get smell into the water. Don't want to feed them with it, just want a concentration of smell, and it will have some oil in it, it will have some soluble smell in it, and it will have a heavy liquid as well just to hold it on the bottom. Those particles will just hold that smell in the area, and the fish, they'll smell that from a distance, come in, see the hook bait, and that's a winner. Well, just look at this one. Algae in the water, quite tricky to see through it, and that's where these fish will be working with their sense of smell as opposed to just their eyesight. So a big smelly bag, loads of liquid in it as well, just to draw their attention. And then when they're coming down to it, of course, we know very well that carp, actually when they get close up to something, they find it trickier to see. A bright hook bait helps as well, something that will stand out in that green water. And a little change for me, and it's produced the goods with this one. Now I mentioned zigs earlier, and anybody that watches Underwater Answers will have seen the film that we did last year. It was absolutely brilliant down at Thorpley. Black zigs completely and utterly dominated. That water was really, really clear. The big question is, what are they going to be like in this type of water? What are they like when the water's coloured or there isn't as much light around? Now, zig fishing isn't just a case of chucking a bit of flip-flop in the water and hoping for the best. There's a lot more to it. Where are they in the water column? Are they high or are they low? And remember, if they're lower, you've got light to think about too. So what I want to do now is put different coloured zigs to the test and find out which is the best at various different levels and depths through that water column. So let's start with a black zig, and you can see straight away the water clarity isn't exactly brilliant. There's not that much light around at the moment, and from maybe 2 to 3 feet away you can just about make the zig. Look at that, there's a little air bubble on the top of it as well, just come out the foam, and actually that is exactly what caddis nymph have. That's exactly what caddis nymph have. But close up to it there, surface layers, absolutely brilliant, bite every day of the week. Got to be a winner, that one. However, what I wanted to know is there a big difference between this zig in the surface layers and a little bit lower down? So you can see there, I'm just pulling it down, and you watch the colour change. It goes from the lighter blue just starting to go green. Now bear in mind that I am probably only now 6 inches, maybe 8 inches away. Look at that, it's nearly disappearing. It's gone into that cloud of algae, and you've got something here called stratification, where there was a big clump of algae, and that's about 3 foot below the surface. Now I've had to get closer to it to see it. Just backing away, that's a foot away now, can't really see it, and then coming back into the clear water it becomes obvious again. So if you're fishing a black zig in a cloud of algae, you know what, more than a foot away, you're just not going to see it. You're reliant purely on those fish moving right by the side of it. So let's have a look at the yellow, similar sort of position, a couple of feet below the surface, and the sunlight's changed. So the light's gone in a bit. However, just look how bright that yellow is, and it grabs all of the light around it and stands out a little bit. Now this is in a darker bit of water than the bright bit of black earlier, and that's just more than an arm's length away, and it still stands out. So yellow definitely stands out in that cloudier water, higher up in the water column. But what happens when it goes lower? Let's have a look. Straight back in again, you can see it's grabbing every single little bit of light that it can there and really stands out, and that will be very noticeable to fish higher up in the water column. Right, let's grab hold of it and go a little bit deeper down now. And there we are, look, it's going into that deeper water. That's where the coloured algae is, that really heavy cloud. And you can see it's virtually disappeared in that cloud of greeny yellow algae. So black's gone and yellow's gone as well. I just want to go back now and have a look at that zig coming down through the clear water into the really heavy yellow water. Just look at the difference once again as a reminder. That's massive. It can be really well seen when it's higher in the water in the clear bit, and literally a foot below that, it virtually disappears. Now think about it, a lot of the time when you're zig rig fishing, you're not catching anything, you lift it up a foot and suddenly you get bites straight away. This could be exactly that reason. It was stuck in a darker pocket of algae that quite frankly you can't see because it's well below the surface. As soon as it comes out of it and into the clear water, it's visible again, bang, the fish are on it. So now let's have a look at red in exactly the same place, and look at that. From a lot further away you can see it, that's probably 3-4 foot, whereas the others 2 foot you couldn't see it, and that red really stands out well. Just look how well that's silhouetted and how much you can see that. Remember though that this is still in the upper layers, but what I will say is that there was a light change and cloud came across the sun, and it made that light penetration down there not quite as good anyway, so if it was bright it would be even better. But that's it in the upper layers, looking really good. I'm now going to take it deeper and let's have a look how it performs in that thick body of algae. There it is coming up, look, that's that horrible thick yellowy stuff. You can see the camera trying to pull focus on that through. We've lost the background, but you can still see the zig. With both yellow and black, you could hardly see that at that distance, whereas the red one really stands out well. Red undoubtedly is the colour to use for a zig when you're deep underwater in algae. And there, look, we're coming back up again. The sun's come out a little bit more. It's bright, and up in the surface layers as well. It just looks absolutely fantastic. So we'll just pause it here and have a look at two things. One is what I call strobing. Have a look at the foam. You'll see that there's little lines of light shining on that zig foam. That's where the light's hitting the surface, and because there's a slight ripple on it, it's making the ripple move and it's making that zig foam flash on and off. And that can be a real attraction for fish as well. That draws their line of sight. The second thing now is if we stop the film completely and you have a look at the top of the picture, you'll see another red dot just at the very top of the screen. That's actually the reflection of the zig on the underside of the surface of the water. So if you imagine when you're looking up from below the surface is like looking in a mirror. You can't see out if you're at a certain angle, you can only see a reflection. And that's perfect proof of this, the reflection of the zig on its way back up through the water. Right, so what can we conclude from that? Well, a little bit like the bottom baits, it's very difficult to see stuff. Whatever that stuff is, it's difficult to see it from a distance away. But certain colours work better in certain areas. Now, just have a little bit more of a think about when you're zig rig fishing. A lot of the time we hear people saying they're catching on a 14-foot zig or a 7-foot zig or even a 4-foot zig. What on earth does that mean? It means that you're 14 foot off the bottom. Well, you could be fishing in deeper or shallower water than me. What we all need to do is we need to reverse the way that we talk about zig rigs and talk about how far below the surface. So it might be 3 foot down, 4 foot down, 2 foot down. That's a much better way of describing where the fish are in that level. The other thing is that you look in the water and you might see that it's clear. And it could be clear today, but actually the algae might have sunk, because algae moves up and down in the water. And as you've seen through the earlier parts of this film, it looks clear in the top bit, but as soon as you get 3 foot down, it's really, really coloured. So just have a think about that. Remember also that it blooms and it dies back. So last week you might have been on a clear venue using black zigs, worked really well, shooting fish in a bucket. You know what, it's been sunny, you think great, it's going to be good for zigs again, but the algae's kicked up, you've not noticed, and now you can't catch one. It could be algae that's causing it. So there's lots and lots to think about. But let's make some basic conclusions about the colours that we've seen. For a start, black is brilliant when the water is clear or there's a reasonable amount of light around, i.e. in that top foot or two. As soon as you start going deeper than that, black starts to lose itself. Yellow, another similar one as well, where you've got good light conditions, or alternatively you're up towards the top end, that can be good. But as soon as you start dipping down into clouds of algae, red stands out as the best one. You can see them all when you're right close up next to them, of course you can, but 2-3 foot away, that's going to be the key distance, and that's where a red zig really stands out, particularly as you go 3-4 foot down into that area where the algae might be. And also, you know, let me just throw this into the equation as well, because I've seen it myself, I've heard other people doing it too. You're catching, then suddenly they stop. Where are they? Have they gone up in the water or down in the water? If you're putting bait in, they could be following the big bits down, they could be coming up to intercept the little bits a little bit closer to the surface. Or alternatively, algae might have moved in if you're not baiting over the top of it, and that might have an effect as well. So don't necessarily think they've disappeared. They might just have moved up or down, or it might be harder to find your zig in the area that it is. So if you think you're in a good spot, lift it up a foot. See if you can get it a bit towards the surface. And at this time of year, I tend to come up rather than down. And that is where an adjustable zig can be absolutely perfect, because you know what? You can adjust it without having to even reel in. You don't have to cut your rig. You just pop it up, take it down again. In times of algae, adjustable zigs, absolutely brilliant. And that takes us on to a really, really popular method of fishing at this time of year, and that of course is surface baits. Now, I've done an awful lot of it this year, more than I've ever done, caught loads and loads of fish, and I think I've got my tactics right this year. Zigs as well, been brilliant up in the water, and we've had quite a few questions sent in about surface baits, surface fishing, and also what rigs look like. So let's go below the surface now and take a look at floater fishing. So the first thing I'd like to look at is how fish see underwater. They've obviously got eyes in their head, and this is quite important, it's quite relevant, because if you've surface fished, you'll have seen things like this happen, but the eyes are on the side of the head. They don't look forwards, they look sideways, so they've actually got a blind spot directly in front of their nose. The distance depends on the size of the fish, but if you were, say, 4 inches, maybe 6 inches, that would be an area that's a little bit of a blind spot and they can't see it. So when the fish is coming up to take the surface bait, sometimes we think they're really cagey and they come up and just miss it. My own personal view is they've missed it because they just can't see it. They're going for it, they can't see it. The other one is that if you have a look close quarters at how fish feed on the surface, there's different types. Sometimes they'll pac-man, in which case they're swimming along the surface pac-manning, Other times they'll come up from the depth. It's the real confident ones, wallop, they'll come high, almost out of the water and grab it. And then sometimes they're sippers where they'll just sit underneath the surface and suck the bait back in again. And these all have their own individual challenges. So pack manning fish are clearly the easiest ones to catch. They want the food. They're after the food, they're in the upper layers, they're moving as little as possible, and their line of sight is lateral as opposed to vertical. That means that they can't really see a lot. There's not a lot of white light around, it's mainly green light, and you can see that from this shot here. This is what you see when you're looking across the water. This is more or less what the fish see. Now, when the fish are coming up from slightly deeper, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. There's something called Snell's window. And Snell's window is like a manhole. If you imagine you're down low, looking up through the surface, you're looking up through a circle. And on a lot of my pictures looking up, you'll see there's a very dark ring around the outside of it. What that is the light bit is where the fish is looking up through the water and seeing the sky above. It can see through and everything is crystal clear, everything is silhouetted. When you look to the left, the right, or indeed outside of that, you'll see that it looks black. And what that is they're looking in a mirror at the bottom of the lake. Sounds really weird, I get that, but if you imagine there's a circle, that's what they're looking up. Looking through it, effectively they're looking up through this area here. So they can see out there. If they're outside of that and they're looking through this bit here, they're seeing the reflection. So they look up and they're seeing the reflection of underneath. What relevance does that have? The most important thing that we have to think of at the moment is an angle of 98 degrees, because that is what that window is. So if the fish is here, it has a vision of 98 degrees. Outside of that, it can't see out, period. Simple as, it just can't see out the water. So it sees a reflection. Now, if the fish is coming at a shallow angle to come up and take your bait, it's looking into green water and dark water, but it can also see the reflection of the bait. Just have a look at this shot to illustrate that as well. You see the bait, you see the hook, and actually there's another one sat on top of it. Crazy, isn't it? Potentially the fish could get that mixed up and go for the wrong one. It's going for the mirror image of your bait rather than the hook bait itself. And this is where I think sometimes that fish comes up and goes for it and just misses. I think it's looking at the wrong bit. It's looking at the reflection rather than the hook bait. But anyway, by the by, it's really important to think about how those fish are feeding, because what they see has an effect on how you should present. Let's look at more rigs underwater now and look at a perfect floater presentation. So let's have a look at a standard floater setup, and this is absolutely brilliant. Size 10 zig and floater hook. Let's have a look at the difference between it in the green and on the sky. That's it looking through Snell's window. Small hook, very well presented. That is an absolutely perfect presentation. Get those hooks down so they're well disguised. Get them hidden by the bait. And we'll just look along it now. Look at that, you can hardly see that line there. The hook bait is perfect. That would be mistaken for a safe bait any single day of the week. So that is absolutely bang on. Small hook, nice hook bait, really tight on the shank. Line looks lovely. There are ways you can get it wrong. And the first mistake that I see a lot of people making is that they hair rig in the same way that they would hair rig a boilie, in that the hair's too long and it's coming off the bend rather than the shank. Just have a look at this and see what I mean. Now we're going to look at a few common errors now, and this, to all intents and purposes, looks pretty good. There's a bait there, but look at it, it's hair rigged, and it's hair rigged in the normal sort of way that you would hair rig a small pop-up boilie. And quite frankly, it just sits terribly. You can see the hook really well from all angles, whether it's at a light angle, or worse still, just look at that where you're looking directly up at it. The hook is really obvious. Hooking capabilities aren't very well. Boilies need to be hair rigged off the bend. Floater baits, well, they've got to be hair rigged right off the shank. Now clearly that's a bit of a no-no, because for a start everything's really obvious whether you're looking from underneath or from the side, but also I think the hooking arrangement is a little bit dodgy on that as well. Boilies, yes, from the bend. Floater baits, no, they need to come off the shank. So let's have a look at another simple thing that you might not realise, but it does make a massive difference, and that's hook size. Let's have another little look now at something which is very easy to make a mistake on, and that's hook size. That looks really, really nice. It's hair rigged in the right place, tight off the back of the shank, but the hook is quite simply too big. It's a size 6 and it stands out like a sore thumb. You can see it from all angles. whether it's coming in from the side or alternatively right underneath it, looking up at a clear sky, really stands out. And that's the sort of thing that's going to attract fish's attention. They're going to come up to it, but as soon as they get close, you're going to get refusals and rejections. And if you're seeing that you're getting refusals and rejections, the best thing to do is drop your hook size down or check the way that the hook is sitting underneath the bait. It's clear that a bigger hook might well hook the fish better, but actually if you have a look at it, what's the chance of getting a bite on that? They've got to be absolutely balmy. They can see it, it's silhouetted, there's loads of light up there. For me, when you're surface fishing, get that hook size down, get the bait size down as well if you can do, but get the hook size down, size 10, zig and floater hook, and look no further than the zig and floater line coupled with the zig and floater hook. Guess what, guys? They're called that because they're specifically made for the job, and if this doesn't convince you, I don't know what will. So that's it, a little roundup and a summary about fishing in lakes that have got algae in them. Now, you know, it can be tricky. You can go out to the lake and a lot of the time you're hearing they're just not having it, there's a problem. It's very easy to shrug your shoulders and actually look for a reason why you're not catching without trying to solve the problem. And hopefully this will have helped you, just that little bit of thought process, a little bit more attention to detail, that might be able to work you around the problems in front of you and catch you a fish or two. As we always do, we've really enjoyed making this, so please give us a like, subscribe as well so you get all the information just that little bit earlier than everyone else, and put your comments below. If there's anything at all that you want to know, do let us know. If you like it, give us a thumbs up and tell us too.